have a quorum?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to our SANDAG Board of Directors meeting. It's nice to see you all here on Zoom again. It is 9:01 on Friday, January 28th, 2022, and this is our Board of Directors meeting. I'm officially calling the meeting to order. So before we get started, I would like to ask our interpreter to introduce himself and walk us through how to access translation services. Carlos?
Thank you, Chair Blakespeare. I will begin with the instructions in Spanish and I will be back with the instructions in English. Muy buenos días. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para aprovechar el servicio, por favor, desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen sus controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, interpretation is being provided to and from Spanish. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Then click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish flow in the background. Gracias, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. I invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now we're on to public comments. So if you would like to make a non-agenda public comment, please raise your hand. Then I'll also just announce that we're going to take non-agenda member comments at the end of the meeting today. So this is a time for non-agenda public comments. So do we have any of those?
Thank you, Chair. I do see one hand up from the public.
Okay, let's hear
Drew, thank you. Drew Katie, you can go ahead when you're ready.
I'm unmuted. Good morning, SANDAG board members. I suspect that many of you were in attendance, or at least were aware of the latest NCTD meeting on January 20th. It was, to say the least, a confirmation that NCTD is not listening to the community who are feeling devastated that fencing is being contemplated to completely seal off all access to our revered bluff and the beaches and oceans below. I trust that all of you realize that this means there will be no access throughout the Del Mar South Bluff area, perhaps for the rest of any of our lives. That is a 1.7 mile length of bluff, which will be simply eliminated from our lives, our ability to appreciate its beauty and sense of peace, because NCTD is telling us that this is to protect the pedestrians. This is, unfortunately, not at all what they are intending. They plan to send twice as many trains along this fragile line daily at an increased speeds of as much as 20 miles per hour faster. How is this possible that the single most important reason that we live along this panorama of ocean views counts for nothing? How is it possible that many of you who sit here today are simply turning your backs and ignoring the depths of this devastation to the bluff that we all love? And how can you call yourselves representatives of the communities that you live in when you are allowing this steal of our precious coastline? You can change this scenario. You can change your minds and those of others and recognize that it is time to accelerate the timeline of moving this precarious train line inland before we all pay the price of a ruinous and tragic accident. Do it, folks. It is your legacy that we are talking about. Do it for our children, that they might still be able to safely stroll this magnificent bluff trail and gaze out to the blows of the gray whales who populate this coastline every year, and the dolphins and seals and shorebirds, and the red-tailed hawks who soar over our heads as we bow them to the earth. Thank you.
Chair, I have a question. Are we able to ask questions of the public comment speakers?
No.
Okay,
Because
thank you very much.
Okay.
Chair, that concludes all the public commenters.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Gasterlund, we are going to take the member comments at the end. We should have time, but we just want to make sure that we do get through things. And sometimes we can get really delayed at the beginning when we have so many things at the beginning.
Thank you, Chair. Understood.
So we will get to you, and thank you to the public commenter. So with that, we will thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Is that true, Francesca?
No, Chair, no other hands.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the CEO's report, and Hassan has a speaking engagement that he has committed to a long time ago, and so he needed to fulfill that responsibility. So he won't be joining us today, but we do have somebody filling in here to give. Ray Major is going to be giving the CEO report, so let's hear that from him.
Good morning, Chair Blakespear. Thank you very much. Good morning, members of the board. As Chair Blakespear said, Hassan asked that I cover the CEO report for you today. As Hassan mentioned at your last meeting, we continue to monitor the COVID situation and make decisions regarding telecommuting based on health and safety. Employees who are able to have been encouraged to work from home through next week. With that said, we're proud to say that we have not slowed down at all when it comes to the agency's business. As Hassan mentioned last week, we are continuing to work on delivering transformative projects for the San Diego region. Last week, we learned that we are receiving a grant for $405,000 from the U.S. Department of Transportation to plan for transit-oriented development along the Blue Line trolley. And we will use these funds to find ways to better connect our communities to transit and affordable housing along the Blue Line. This is a perfect opportunity to continue to build off of our investments on the Mid-Coast Corridor extension and ensure that we're moving the needle forward in terms of making transit more convenient, faster, and reliable for everybody. We are also pleased to have Chair Blakespear represent SANDAG earlier this week when she joined Congressman Mike Levin to celebrate the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and what it will bring to the region. The federal bill offers a huge opportunity for us to move forward in many ways on many projects and programs and priorities that we've planned through the 2021 regional plan. We look forward to continuing to work with our congressional delegation to bring home as many dollars to the region as we can. And this has also been a big week for the regional network too, the bike network. On Tuesday, SANDAG broke ground on the new Pershing Bikeway project. And I'd like to thank the chair and vice chair, as well as Caltrans Director Gustavo Delarda and the San Diego Bike Coalition for joining in that event. The Pershing Bikeway will provide a vital connection between Balboa Park and downtown San Diego. And coming up very soon, the 4th and 5th Avenue Bikeways, Georgia Meade Bikeway, and the Landis Bikeway projects will be fully opened. In fact, SANDAG is set to break ground on more than 19 miles of bikeway this year and open 11 miles of new bikeways in 2022. We're also pleased this month that we are working with Caltrans and the San Dieguito River Park Joint Powers Authority on phase 2 of the San Dieguito Lagoon Wetland Restoration Project. And we are planning for a second MOU signing in just a couple of weeks on the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry project. This is a huge milestone for the project, and it brings us one step closer to an opening in 2024. And finally, we're looking forward to the first Regional Equitable Housing Subcommittee meeting led by Supervisor Tara Larson-Remer next Tuesday, February 1st. Chair, this concludes my report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I would also just like to add a couple of small things. So one is that in the ongoing effort to manage a lot of different opinions, we are going to stay virtual for our next meeting, which is February 11th. So everyone can plan to show up here on Zoom again on February 11th. And then also yesterday we had a meeting, a high-level meeting between NCTD, MTS, and SANDAG to talk about the specific portion of Transnet that funds new transit service. So when the voters passed Transnet, there was a special bucket, which was 8.1% that goes to new transit service in both NCTD and MTS's transit lines. And so the question of how, we know Transnet is not producing as much money. So the question of how long will Transnet be able to support these new transit services and what can the agencies realistically rely on was the topic of conversation. So we are working toward an agreement that gets out 8 years to 2030. But the whole conversation made it really clear to me that we need to have a board level discussion about what Transnet is funding and what our priorities are, especially in light of the 5 big moves and our regional plan, which we've recently passed, to make sure that where we're spending our money is what the board's priorities are. So we'll be moving forward with figuring out a mechanism to have that conversation, whether it's a subcommittee or at the board level or at the retreat, or all those things are still in basically consideration of how to have that conversation in a way that everybody can participate and we can have it be transparent and also take feedback from the public and everything. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that, because as we've been hearing about for a long time, Transnet is not able to fund everything. And we need to be realistic. And we also need our transit agencies that rely on us to be able to plan their own budgets. So we know that nobody likes to fall off a cliff and realize all of a sudden they have to make quick changes. We need to be looking ahead to what is the reality here. So I just wanted to make sure that was on everyone's horizon, as it's something that's really important that this agency needs to reckon with. So that's the end of the little addendum to the chair's report. Did Mayor Jones, did you have a comment on the chair's report?
I did.
Okay.
I had a questions because, and Ray, I know that you're filling in for Hassan today, but he said last meeting that we would have an update when we would have the elimination of the road user fee coming forward, being that it was approved in the. So do we have anything on that, an update on that? Because he did say it would be within the next couple of months.
Okay, just a second.
Hi, Mayor Jones and members of the board. So the first priority is to make sure that we get our state and federal approvals on the current plan before we start talking about an amendment. So we're hopeful that the current plan, we will get our approval from the state and the federal agencies by the end of April, possibly May. So that's the first step. And then we can start talking about how to approach the amendment. At this point, we could be jeopardizing state and federal funding if we're already working on an amendment to the plan that you all approved at the end of the year. So then we'll be working with the chair and the leadership to schedule something to bring that item back to you. So maybe Chair Blakespear, if you want to comment on that further.
No, I mean, I think you covered it. You know, the whole point of passing it on time was to get approval. So like we passed it by the end of the year and we need to make sure we get that approval. And so I think we're still waiting for that. And that's really what's delaying this.
And yet that was the very next thing on the agenda, which I find a little interesting. Okay. And then also, I don't know, being that Hassan's not here, but I did want to find out, you know, we've had a lot of discussions about on-time deliveries and all that, which is one of the reasons that I think we really need to focus on this year, instilling some confidence with the voters and the residents of San Diego County that we are spending their tax dollars wisely. I know that we talk about the Mid-Coast quite a bit. And so I found an article that talked about 1.24 billion, 1.7 billion, 2.1 billion is our final adjusted budget on that. So I wanted to find out if we could get a timeline on that. I think this would be the appropriate time to ask for that from our executive director. I guess maybe Ray and Colleen could fill in on that, but it would be great to have a timeline as to when it was originally approved, all the different changes. Because, you know, when we're talking about such a big RTP right now, and having the, you know, how much things are going to cost, we really need to make sure we're very careful, because when we have something as large as the mid-coast, you know, changing from 1.24 billion to 2.1 billion, that's a lot of money. So I just want to make sure that we have a very clear timeline and showing how that actually kind of happened historically, if that's possible. I don't know. I know
Sure,
that was
let us look into that. I think we can do something like that.
great. Awesome. All right. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So did we have any public comment on the CEO report?
No public comments, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. So now we're on to consent. So this is item 3 through 9. Yes, you see it there. And I would entertain a motion.
Move the consent agenda, Chair.
Second, Sankey.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comment?
I don't see any hands from the public, Chair.
Okay, then let's go ahead and vote.
Thank you very much. For the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall. I'll come back to Mayor Hall. For the
Yes,
city-
I'm sorry, I had trouble getting my mic open.
No worries,
Yes.
happens to me all the time. For the City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Anderson.
I'm sorry, trying to get my mic on. Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Del Mar, Mayor Gasterland.
Gasterland for Del Mar, yes.
Thank you. For the City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Encinitas, Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
Thank you. The City of Escondido is absent. For the City of Imperial Beach, Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
Let me say yes.
Thank you. For the City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Mayor Vasquez, yes.
Thank you. For the City of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis. I will come back to the City of National City. For the City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Santee, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Solana Beach, Mayor Hebner.
Hebner, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you. And for the City of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis. Oh, it looks like. Mayor Sotelo Solis, I opened your microphone.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
Thank you. I'll get you moved over. Keep an eye out for the promotion.
Thank you.
Apologies. That item does pass with 18 yeses and 1 absence.
Okay, thank you. So now we're on to our first item, which is our report. Item number 10, update on SANDAG Equity Action Plan. And we have Sally Goodman here to present the item.
Good morning, Chair Blakespear and Board of Directors. I'm going to share my screen. We'll see if we can make this work. Let's see, there's that. There we go. I hope you're all seeing the presentation. As you mentioned, I'm Sally Goodman, Social Equity Analyst in the Office of Diversity and Equity. I'm here to provide an update about progress toward developing SANDAG's Equity Action Plan. I want to mention that many SANDAG teammates have contributed to getting to this point. Elizabeth Cox presented this work to the Social Equity Working Group in November, where it was very well received. Last year, you adopted a statement that affirms SANDAG's commitment to equity. Within it are 5 clear expectations for what our equity action plan should do. And the 5 objectives are shown here on this slide. As we continue to lay the foundation for our equity action plan, staff have been hard at work developing and implementing activities to advance the work now. And I'd like to highlight a few of these efforts for you. First, intentional focus was given to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, within the organization in 2021. SANDAG joined the Government Alliance on Race and Equity to connect and learn with others working to advance DEI in public service. Staff also participated in various ongoing working groups and peer exchanges with metropolitan planning organizations and other agencies in California and across the country. These connections offer a rich exchange of experiences, ideas, and best practices. Also last year, SANDAG seated a 12-member DEI council representing a wide spectrum of diversity within the organization. The council is chaired by Principal Regional Planner Tuere Faola. The council has been focusing on the employee experience, conducting and reviewing surveys, and identifying opportunities for action. Subcommittees were recently formed to create employee resource groups and to review the employee onboarding buddy program. Informal affinity groups have also been created to support Asian American and Pacific Islander employees and Black employees. And last summer, the DEI Council began hosting lunch and learn sessions to foster cultural competence. They presented programs so far for Juneteenth, Hispanic American History Month, and Indigenous Peoples Day. SANDAG partnered with a DEI practitioner to provide initial trainings to the DEI Council and executive team on 3 topics: emotional intelligence, unconscious bias, and microaggressions, excuse me. And staff provided social equity trainings continue to expand employees' knowledge of how best to comply with anti-discrimination statutes and regulations. More than 40 employees engaged in completing the Center for Global Inclusion's Global DEI Benchmarks Assessment. The assessment generated dozens of recommendations spanning across 4 focus areas: foundation, internal, external, and bridging. Another team of employees conducted a qualitative review of that assessment, and some recommendations are already being considered or implemented. Staff envision reviewing and prioritizing the remaining recommendation through the course of developing the Equity Action Plan. Along with activities to advance DEI internally, staff have been working on early actions to implement our commitment to equity in the community. Attachment 2 contains a summary of these efforts. The largest, of course, is the 2021 Regional Plan, which the board adopted last month. The Regional Social Equity Planning Framework contained in the plan says, SANDAG is committed to prioritizing equity and inclusion as an organization and in our work serving the region. As you know, the Social Equity Working Group helped shape the regional plan. The working group is a collaborative forum for community-based organizations to provide input from disadvantaged and underrepresented communities. They provided input on a variety of programs and projects, including conducting community mobility needs assessments in the communities they represent. The Social Equity Working Group developed proposals for social equity or early action transit pilots, which are intended to improve mobility for historically underserved populations. The pilots were approved by the board in October and will provide free transit for all youth 18 years and younger starting this spring and increase transit services in historically underserved areas. The Regional Digital Equity Strategy and Action Plan are intended to move the region toward bridging the digital divide, ensuring that everyone in the San Diego region has affordable broadband access will ensure access to other essential services, education, and work opportunity. SANDAG also recently donated 108 used computers to the San Diego Futures Foundation to be refurbished and offered to people with limited incomes, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, foster families, and nonprofits. The Regional Equitable Housing Committee will explore housing solutions that are local, regionally integrated, equitable, and sustainable. The Community Benefits Agreement will establish equity programs for low-income people, including targeted workers and veterans, and will implement a local hire program that uses a skilled and trained workforce. This slide shows a few other early actions to implement equity, which have been moving forward. To ensure access for people who don't speak English very well, simultaneous interpretation in Spanish is provided at all SANDAG Board and Policy Advisory Committee meetings and at public outreach meetings. Interpretation for other languages is provided upon request. Closed captioning for persons with hearing impairments is provided for online streaming board meetings. In partnership with the UC San Diego School of Global Policy, SANDAG is localizing data related to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the Cal EVIP, San Diego County Incentive Program, is the region's electric vehicle charger rebate program. It will provide $21.7 million in incentives for public, workplace, and shared use multi-unit dwelling chargers, providing higher incentives in disadvantaged and low-income communities. So we've talked about some of our work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization and early efforts to advance equity in the community. I'd like to turn now to specific activities underway to develop the Equity Action Plan. As I mentioned at the top, development of the SANDAG's Equity Action Plan flows from our vision and mission statements and from the commitment to equity statement. The Equity Action Plan will outline how SANDAG will incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion in all activities. As an early step to prepare the Equity Action Plan, last summer, all employees were invited to contribute to an ongoing inventory of equity-related activities. In that process, staff provided over 160 entries of programs, projects, policies, processes, and plans from throughout the organization, both inward and outward facing. Excuse me. The inventory describes where equity is already being considered, as well as where it has the potential to be. A thematic summary of the inventory is included in your packet as attachment 1. I beg your pardon. SANDAG staff have been gathering and analyzing data to develop a baseline conditions report. This is also an early action of the 2021 regional plan. The baseline report is envisioned to explore themes of health, wealth, access, and opportunity, focusing on race and ethnicity, linguistic isolation, disability, and income. Later on, the report will help us measure progress we're making to implement the Equity Action Plan. As we prepare the Equity Action Plan, we recognize that this work is so much more powerful when done with community, connecting and collaborating to develop a plan that will result in meaningful changes for our region. Staff presented an update about the plan development to the Social Equity Working Group in November. We hope to continue partnering with the organizations leading that group this year. And an early next step in developing the plan will be conducting outreach and engagement, especially with external stakeholders. Finally, the development of a formal and well thought out equity action plan will take time to get right, but much of the groundwork was very much laid in 2021. We want to create an atmosphere where all stakeholders, employees, and members of the community can participate in all phases of developing it. Staff have initiated the procurement process. In fact, we're quite a ways along that road now for a consultant who can provide independent advice, recommendations, and guidance on the strategy for next steps in developing the plan. Once the consultant is on board, more specific details for developing the plan and accompanying outreach activities will be available. The baseline data report will be presented to the board early this year, and staff will continue to recommend impactful actions to implement the goals of the equity statement soon. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the presentation and the update. Do we have any public comments on this item?
Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Okay, let me call on our board members here. So Mayor Vasquez, and then we'll go to you, Mayor Jones, and then we'll go to you, Councilmember Shute. I'm sorry, I didn't see who put their hands up first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, SANDAG staff. And thank you to the public who contributed to the dialogue to develop the Equity Action Plan. And thank you, staff, for sharing the early actions that advanced the equity statement last year that is provided in this update. I am encouraged to hear that the agency is taking equity seriously and taking significant steps forward. When I and my colleagues on the board developed and approved the equity statement, we set the agency in a very clear direction. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the baseline data report in the future. And I ask that SANDAG staff work with me as the Equity Action Plan moves forward. Overall, I am proud of the change we have seen with SANDAG, and I'd like to again thank staff, but also thank Hassan for leading such a great team. And I'll turn this over back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor Jones.
Thank you so much. And Sally, thank you for all of your hard work. I know it's a lot to go through. I just wanted to mention that I really would love for us to look into starting or helping facilitate a program like MAC is doing. And that's to help lower income folks obtain funding many times when they don't have stellar credit, which is oftentimes, or no credit, which is oftentimes the case. And so, you know, as we move forward, I know in a lot of my lower income areas and, you know, my affordable housing, trying to get those chargers in, which we are working on, and I definitely know it's going to happen. But if people aren't driving the EV cars, that's a problem. So MAC has this wonderful program that's really specific to lower income folks, like I said. So I would love for us to look into figuring out how we could help facilitate something like that. Thanks.
I think it's time for Councilmember Shute to speak.
Thank you, Chair Blakespear. And I want to really thank SANDAG and SANDAG staff and its leadership for moving ahead on this equity movement. And it's not easy, and I think there's lots of issues to cover. And I think we are probably moving faster and better than many other regional transportation agencies. There's a few items that I wanted to emphasize, and maybe some parts of what the staff is working on that we're missing. One is AB 805 pointed out some inequities in terms of environmental justice, which I think we need to address. And what I'm really want to get to at some point in the future, and I think it's going to take us some time for us to get there as an agency, is to deal with systems of inequity. We know that transportation availability is inequitable in our region. There are systems in place that I believe cause that. So that's a big topic, maybe an academic topic in many ways as well. But in some ways, we have to fix that. And I hope we can address that. Included in that, and included in the mission of our equity statement, is how we fund projects. This deals with economic equity, economic justice. And that's a whole category that I don't see in the report, is what's the best way to deal with economic justice? Who's paying for what? We fund sometimes, I believe, systems that are not very efficient in terms of how much we spend
government spend and individual spend. And to that degree, I think that's a huge topic. And I don't know if that belongs in the equity team at SANDAG or that we ask the planning department, transportation planning, to address that. There's another area that I'm hoping SANDAG can move forward on, which is start analyzing the cost of transportation as part of overall measurement together with cost of housing. And I've mentioned this before, other planning agencies, regional planning agencies have ventured into this, which is calculating cost of housing and transportation as a percentage of family income to identify those parts of our communities which really need help, both in terms of housing and transportation. That's a matrix that I think will help us really deal with all the equity issues that we're addressing now. Those are big topics, and I don't expect SANDAG to be able to make a huge progress in 1 year. I think you've made already a lot of progress in terms of training. I really like the celebrations of Juneteenth, Hispanic Heritage Month. There are other Asian American heroes that we could also point out, and maybe we can include them in our activities. And I really also appreciate acknowledging from time to time the land acknowledgement of Native American land that we currently occupy. I think that's something we could include in many of our programs. This is, I guess, a topic that, of course, I'm very passionate about, but I really commend SANDAG and our leadership for moving ahead as much as we have in this last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Council Member. It's nice to see you back participating in this board. We're happy to see you here. So I don't see any other hands raised, and okay, one more, Mayor Sotelo Solis, and then we'll move to our next item.
Yes, thank you so much. Just fairly quickly, I just wanted to say again, thank you to staff for the presentation. Again, it really states and solidifies our priority, not only to the equity statement, to an equity plan. And that's big. Talk is cheap, action speaks a lot louder than words. So we really are all about implementation. One of the things that I would love to hear is if we are planning, maybe through our retreat or even other opportunities where it's a webinar or a Zoom thing that as board members, we can participate in, because there's a lot of times where the word equity or inequity and diversity is kind of thrown around. And I really feel that when we as elected officials use those terms, we should really have the context and the truly the ability to really recognize what consequences those words have. And so I think that it's important that, beyond the staff, I think that's really important, because they are the kind of the heartbeat, but and the pulse. I think if we can extend that, and again, just maybe a series of trainings that we can do, not mandatory, but highly encouraged. Vocabulary words, I think, and our own leisure time, we can do, being as how we have thousands of hours, to devote. I think that it's really exciting to be able to, continue to learn as our role as elected officials. So with that, just food for thought there, Chair, and for Ms. Goodman, if we could just hear if there's that opportunity in the future.
Well, thank you for those ideas. And thank you, Ms. Goodman, for the presentation. So that was an information item. So we will move on to our next two reports, and they are both from the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor. So the first up is the results of the State Route 125 agreed upon procedure review. So I will hand it over to Mary and her team to present this.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear. Good morning, everybody. I hope you are looking forward to the weekend. I know I am. The first report is the SR 125. In March of last year, board member Mayor Mary Solis requested that the audit committee direct OPA to perform an audit of the SR 125. She also formally requested it in writing. At the April 23rd, 2021 audit committee meeting, we were given 300 staff hours to direct to answer several questions that Mayor Salas pointed out. There were about 7 questions. It was to review all positions charged to the SR 125 fund, determine the personnel costs charged to the SR 125 fund, and if they were reasonable or appropriate. Determine if there was an appropriate allocation for CalPERS and other indirect overhead costs charged to SR 125. And then any expenditures around compliance allocations of capital improvement projects and any interest earned if that was properly allocated. So it was really agreed upon procedure. What we did as audits, the auditors, we did not audit these items. We basically was looking for the results to answer her questions. And so we worked with SANDAG management and came up with those results to those procedures that were requested. So here today is Tawfiq, who was assigned as the lead auditor on this project, and he is going to briefly go over and describe the results of each of those procedures. And then we will open it up for any questions. Tawfiq?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tawfiq Dafshuri. I'm a principal management internal auditor with the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor here at SANDAG. I will briefly go over the results as Mary said. And so the first item that Mayor Salas asked about was to identify all positions that are charged to the SR 125 fund. And then the second item is related to that, is to basically determine whether the personnel costs are reasonable and appropriate. As far as our results, there were 4 different categories of personnel expenses. The first are employees that are coded as toll operations center employees. And these are ones, most of them work at the toll operations center, and they are sort of dedicated full-time to SR 125. We found basically that between 72 and 75 employees were charged to the SR 125 fund in fiscal years 2018 through 2020. Now that number 72 to 75 is higher than the number of FTEs because it reflects turnover among maybe entry-level staff. As people kind of move in and out, they will show up on payroll, but that is a higher number than actual FTEs. So that's the first category. It's the full-time, the dedicated workforce to the TOC. The second category were employees that work at SANDAG. These may be attorneys, procurement people, contract people, but that charge some of their hours to the SR 125 fund. And approximately 65, 74, and 78 people charge some portion of their hours to the SR 125 fund in fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020. The 2 other categories of labor charges were, there were some small expenses that were from temporary employees. These are people that are hired through staffing agencies, and some of them may eventually be offered a position, a permanent position here. And then the last category were some labor charges that were capitalized. And what that means is, under accounting rules, most employee expenses, they're just, they're expensed every period, but there is an exception to that, the costs that are directly related to a major capital improvement program or project, they can be kind of added to the cost of that project and then depreciated over the lifespan of that asset or the project. So those are the first two. That's the first question is identify those costs. We identified them and then determine whether they were reasonable and appropriate. And yes, upon review, we determined that they were reasonable and appropriate. And what that means that we didn't see any overcharging of costs to the SR 125 fund. The third question that Mayor Salas asked about was to determine whether the allocation of pension and other post-employment benefit costs to the SR 125 fund is appropriate. And other post-employment benefit costs are usually healthcare retirement costs. And so we reviewed the pension and OPEB costs, and we found them to be in line with other SANDAG pension and OPEB calculations. And so there was nothing that kind of alarmed us there. So I deemed them reasonable, I deemed that they were appropriate. The fourth item was to review overhead allocations to the SR 125 fund. So every year, SANDAG prepares an indirect cost allocation plan, and that plan is submitted either directly to the federal government or to Caltrans. And that plan is required for SANDAG to recover federal funds. And so even though the SR 125 fund is not eligible for federal funding, SANDAG does use one of the overhead rates in the ICAP, in that cost allocation plan. It uses it for internal billing purposes. So what's reassuring about this is basically the ICAP has been audited by Caltrans every year. And I believe this year it was audited by the FHA. And so to the extent that that plan is good, then the rates and the way that SANDAG has been allocating funds to the 125, they have not been over allocating overhead costs. And furthermore, we didn't find any evidence of overbilling or double billing by SANDAG or SANDAG employees that worked, here in downtown to the 125 fund. The fifth item that we examined was, whether capital projects were being allocated to the SR 125 fund, especially those that have nothing really direct to do with the 125 highway. So we identified 5 capital projects that were partially charged to the 125 fund. Those projects are listed in table 7 of the report. They're all somewhat related to the 125 in the sense that you can kind of make an argument as to why some, they could be charged to the 125. And that means that they're either freeway connectors to the 125 or an operational cost that the 125 benefits from. So we inquired of management as to how these allocations were made to the 125 fund, and management's response, and they can elaborate on that later if they choose, was basically that it's ultimately a management decision. The idea on their part is they want to maximize the use of federal funds and state funds first, and then they ultimately use whatever local funds that they have to use. And in some cases, there are matching requirements. And then in some cases too, there are constraints regarding the allowability of the use of some local funds, such as Transnet. So they try to maximize use of other funds, but then they ultimately end up charging 125 with whatever they need. Now, having looked at all those 5 projects, we didn't find that the amount that the allocations to the 125 was unreasonable, because what we did, and you'll see that in table 7, what we did is we computed the proportion that's charged to the 125 as a percentage of the total projected project cost. And in most cases, it was a small proportion. So finally, to the last item, number 6, is to determine the proper allocation of interest to the SR 125 fund. Basically, the cash that is on account for the 125 fund is segregated in a trustee account, and all the interest earned by that account stays segregated for the use of the 125 fund. So those are the results of our test. Our overall conclusion is that the charges to the 125 fund were reasonable and appropriate. The only caveat being that, this is not a full audit. This is a limited agreed upon procedures engagement. So it offers a slightly lower degree of assurance than a full audit will, given the time constraints that we had. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for the report. I see Mayor Salas has her hand up. I did want to ask if we have public comment too on this. So do you want to ask your question first, Mayor Salas?
Yeah, well, you know, yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Mary, and thank you, Mr. Talbushi, for the report that you did. Thank you for taking a dive into this really important matter to people of the South Bay. So one of the questions that I had, though, is in the capital improvement programs and the reserves for that, I know that there's certain money set aside for improvements on the toll system. Can you tell me how much that would be and what time we're expected to, maybe that's not a question for you, but what the amount of those improvements would be and the time factor in when those improvements would be made?
I really don't have that information off the top of my head. I think it's best directed to management and perhaps they can deliver that information to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And I know that's not within your scope of responsibility. So if there's any staff member that can answer that for me, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Hi, Mayor Salas. This is Ryan Ross. I am the Director of Regional Transportation Services at SANDAG. So I lead the operation of the SR 125 toll road. So we're right in the middle right now of replacing our toll collection system on SR 125. And this will really allow us to more effectively and efficiently collect tolls. It is a relatively large project that spans multiple years because it requires going through the entire roadway and replacing both our cash and credit card machines and the overhead tolling equipment as well that reads license plates and vehicles as they travel on the roadway. So we are right now, we're in the midst of preparing our fiscal year 2023 budgets. So this is a project that we're looking at currently to project the remaining expenses that we have. We expect this project to be completed in the upcoming year. But looking at our current budget, I think our remaining expenses approximately somewhere in the $5 to $10 million range to close that project out.
Thank you. Mayor Salas, did that answer your question?
So another question that I had though for you, Mr. Ross. Pardon me?
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. Well, first of all, Mr. Ryan, thank you very much for the tour of the facility 2 days ago. It was very, very interesting. And I can see where, you know, that equipment that was established when the road was open in the early 2000s is in need of upgrade. The question remains, though, is that, you know, are we spending the money in the right ways? And the point that eventually the toll roads are going to come off. And if the board decides to make it a priority for them to get rid of the debt, to refinance or pay off the debt in 2027 when the bonds are payable, I know it's a heavy lift, but we can do this. Is this a final upgrade to that toll system? And still the question wasn't answered about how much the total cost of the project is. I know you have a remaining gap of $5 to $10 million, but if you could give us what the total cost of those upgrades were going to be, number one. Number two, is this the final improvement to that toll system, or is there an anticipation of doing more in the future that would lead all the way to 2042?
Yeah, appreciate the question, Mayor Salas. So let me, I don't want to misquote you a total because I want to get you an exact number for that project. And because we did split the capital project by SR 125 and I-15, because we are replacing the toll collection system on I-15 as well. I don't want to misquote you an exact number. So I'd like to follow up to provide you an exact figure if that's okay. But to answer your question on whether or not any future replacements would be needed, typically, you know, we can expect a toll collection system to be serviceable for probably 10 to 12 years. And once you reach that point, the system would usually reach its end of life, and you would begin preparing for another replacement. So the system that we're installing right now, again, this is going to give us the ability to collect tolls more effectively with more accuracy, which ultimately will allow us to pay down the remaining debt in a more accelerated time frame. So again, depending on the time frame in which we're able to pay off the remaining debt, our existing system the system that we're implementing right now, we can expect that to run for somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 years.
Okay, so 10 to 12 years, really, the system that we have right now, I'll agree with you, is that it should have been replaced with something more current, several years ago, right? But when you're talking about 10 years from today's date, that is 2032. And so the question remains is that how much is being set aside in reserves to do that second phase of tolling in 10 years? And will it be it won't be necessary if the board decides to make it a priority to pay off the debt in 2027 and revert the road to Caltrans. So what's being set aside for that? And is it really going to be necessary if we're really committed to getting rid of a toll? And and the question remains is that, even looking at your own household, and if you have the option to pay off a debt or to continue the debt, you're going to want to pay it off. You're not going to want that liability. And so the questions remains, what are you setting aside for equipment 10 years in the future? And is that factored into all the equations?
It is, yeah. I mean, the funds that we have in our reserve account right now, those funds are there, right? So I think we factored those into our calculations when we presented to the board last year that projected the timeline to pay off the debt. And I know Andre Dujon, our CFO, is in the meeting as well. And Andre, I don't know if you want to jump in and comment on that time frame or kind of where we are with our debt repayments. But again, any future investments that we would make regarding toll collection, those would come at a later date. So those funds are sitting in our reserve account, and in some cases, will be collected in the coming years. Right. So over time, we build up our reserve account, and then there's certain years where we draw from that account to make improvements and to conduct repairs and maintenance. So that's kind of how the cycle of our capital program works.
Yeah, if I can maybe, Chair Blakespear, just maybe add a little bit to what Ryan said. So just as a reminder to the board that we acquired the toll road facility back about 10 years ago out of bankruptcy, and we had some pretty onerous TIF year loans that we were able to refinance. We started with a BBB minus toll road. Today we rated it up to an A+. And so during that time period in 2017, we did refinance, and in fact we saved about $147 million in cash flow savings from that refinance. And so the very first time, as Mayor Salas mentioned, is that we could go to the bond market and call those bonds back would be in 2027. Now, we do have debt service reserve funds. Generally, there's 3 of them. One of them is the operating and maintenance. We have to have 2 years worth of those reserves. It's about $30 million. We also have to have an annual debt service reserve fund, which is about $13 million. And then the balance of it is in the capital reserve fund. And so as Ryan said, generally right now we approximately have $80 million total in reserves. And by 2027, that balance should grow, and the balance should grow based on the fact that any additional monies that we get generally go towards a capital reserve fund for replacement in the future. But if we are able to call the bonds back in 2027 and pay them off, obviously we know those capital reserve funds would go towards the payoff. But, since we took over the toll road, we've had about 6% annual growth. Unfortunately, with COVID hit the last couple of years, revenues, did drop by about 25%. Although today we're almost back to where we were pre-COVID, so we're happy that the reserves are continuing to build, but we did have a little bit of a dip. But again, SANDAG has not taken any money out of the distribution fund, and anything that has been paid for the toll roads is basically goes, as Tawfiq said, towards all the connectors. And so again, on a quarterly basis, we bring the quarterly market update report to the board. We always look at SR 125. If there's any way that we can, service the debt earlier, we take a look at that. And so it's something that we do keep a very close eye on.
Okay, well, I think we should go to the public.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you. Okay, all right, go ahead. And then can I continue my questioning?
Yes, let's hear from the public and see where we are.
Chair, can I continue my questioning after you go to the public?
Yes, let's see where we are, Mayor Salas, in terms of how many members of the public wish to speak, so we can make sure that we don't go too long. But how many hands up do we see, Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. I only see one hand up at this time.
Okay, well, let's hear from the public speaker, and then we'll go back to you, Mayor.
Thank you. Dr. Tim Bailish, you can go ahead with your comments when you're ready.
Thank you so much. I apologize for interrupting the mayor. I want to thank the SANDAG Audit Committee and the Mayor Salas for the provision of this report and the in-depth discussion you guys are having. I wanted to note my review of the report shows Table 3 and 5. In Table 3, the overhead expenses variance increased in the fiscal year 19 and 20. And the overhead cost allocations also increased in 19. I'm sorry, they increased in the 2 years, 19 and 20. Are there particular needs that contributed to these increases, and are they expected to increase for the coming 2 fiscal years? So that's all I have to say. Thank you for taking my comments. And again, apologies, Mayor.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you for your comments. Mayor Mary Salas, would you like to go back to making some additional questions or comments?
Yes. Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, I'm sure would. So first of all, I want to thank the auditors. I want to thank Andre, and I want to thank you for the report, because it really cleared up a lot of questions for us relative to the city of Chula Vista. But we still have questions. So, we know that according to the cash flow reports, am I on?
Yeah.
Was I blocked out?
We can hear you. No, we can hear you this whole time. Yeah.
Okay, because I can't. Okay. Okay, all right. So we know that according to the 2020 cash flow reports, that the delta for payoff, if we go to 2027, is that we're short about $32 million. But it hasn't answered the questions about what is projected to be left, or what is projected to be in reserves at that point in time. And also a calculation of how much interest, how much money, how many dollars would be saved by paying off the debt and not having interest costs. So I think that still has to be answered. And if you have a quick answer for me today, that's great. If not, I would like further study on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Andre, would you like to try?
Sure. Mayor Salas, prior to COVID, we did have a really robust reserve balance. We actually had to take $4 million of our cash from our construction fund so that we met our debt service coverage ratios this last year. But again, like I said, we're pleased that I think the COVID numbers are behind us and we continue to build the reserves. So prior to COVID hitting, you're right, there was about a delta of about $35 million that we would need to raise by 2027 to pay off the whatever the balance was with our reserves. And so today that number is probably closer to 40 million because of the couple of years of downturn that we've had. But again, we can't call the bonds prior to 2027. The goal is that we would continue to build up reserves to that date. And if we're able to find additional funds, certainly I don't like debt. I like to pay off debt. I come back to the board to refinance debt as much as I can, and that would be the goal. But we're not there yet, but we're certainly, past COVID, and the reserves will build up, hopefully, back to the normals that we're at by 2027.
And, I am really hopeful that, the heating up of the economy and the fact that when I did go see the toll road a couple of days ago, I'm seeing that there's a lot of increased traffic on the toll road and new services with the big Amazon center there. That's really, I think, going to drive up the demand for service on the toll road. I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to recoup that downward dip that we had during COVID. We're hearing reports of the economy really heating up, and I certainly hope that that continues. But today, and I don't know, Chair, at what point, I guess the other members should be asking questions, but I don't know at what point that I'd like to make some recommendations going forward on as a part of this report.
Okay, well, let's hear from Councilmember Shu, and then we can get back to you and wrap up this item and move to the next item. So go ahead, Councilmember Shu.
Thank you. I just want to make some quick comments. First, I want to applaud Mayor Salas because she's really after fairness for the people who live in South Bay in Chula Vista, because some people are having to pay to be on this road, which is now a public road, and others who are on other freeway systems are not paying. However, I think this is also a good example, a good lesson for us as to what is the cost of building these freeways, and if we really want to use your funded transportation system, especially one that is polluting our communities, that this is the cost of these roadways, and actually just part of the cost, the primary cost of maintaining and paying off for much of the concrete that was laid. So I think it's a good lesson for us to see what is the cost and how toll roads work or not work in some cases, and how costly they are. I think to me, it's a good lesson. It's one of the road use fees that we would pay for one of the roads in our system, and I think we can learn from that. So, but I do understand Mayor Salas's concerns here, and I share them. I really do share some of her concerns, but I hope we do look at this as a good lesson for us as to how toll roads work and not work, and the cost of these freeways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Mayor Salas, let's get back to you. And what was your request?
Okay, so this is it. So, the collection of the tolls on the SR 125, we know that it impedes not only Chula Vista, but the South Bay for economic development. But the cost of employees getting to work, the reluctance of companies to site where the transportation system relies on a toll road. To us, it's a matter of the ability for us to, in the South Bay, to really flourish economically and to attract those companies that we want to provide the jobs that we need, and that the South Bay becomes more than just a bedroom community for other cities that are rich with job centers, and our people commuting there. I think it would really help in the future. And then, per the November 2020 SANDAG report, SANDAG estimates it's having $110 million cash on hand in the fiscal year 2027 when the bonds are callable. And so, as Andre said, we thought that the delta was $33 million. Andre has corrected that to a $35 million gap. But again, I don't think that factors in a savings of interest, which would be attributable to this at that time, nor the use of the reserves going into it. So I would like to request number one, updated cash flow based on 2021 operational and financial performances of the SR 125, and to really Sandag just 27. The goal was always to pay off the debt and eliminate the tolls. As Andre said, he doesn't like having debt. Nobody likes having debt. So, and also within the request is, I think that it's time to establish a policy. In other words, if we are committed to removing the tolls in 2027, let's look at the toll improvement in the future and make sure that we're not spending on money or spending money on projects that will be unnecessary in the future, should it become revert back to Caltrans. So today, my ask of the board is to consider a policy directive, making the retirement of the debt as a budgetary and policy priority, and to direct staff to develop options to fully fund the debt and call the bonds and
I was having a little bit of connection problem there at the end. I don't know if other people are experiencing that, but I didn't hear everything that she said. But I do see that Mayor Jones's hand is up, so I was going to call on her next.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just wanted to, I'm not exactly sure what Mayor Salas said either, because I couldn't hear everything, but I think we should definitely look into her concerns. And then I think maybe we should just do a full audit. I'm not sure why we didn't do that. I think we would have better information. We could understand better the options and the opportunities if we really understand what happened and where we're at on that project. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
thank you. Go ahead.
Chair Blakespeare, if I can just reply to Mayor Jones's comment. We actually, although Mary Kay's office didn't perform a full audit, we do have independent auditors that provide us an annual financial report on SR 125. And we've had an unqualified, a clean opinion for the last 10 years. So certainly all the information related to the toll road, the operations, the revenues, the debt service reserves, everything is accounted for on an annual basis by our independent CPAs.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Hall.
Yes, you know, I agree with Mary. This is something we should look at, but I think if we remember back in how and why we decided to do 125 the way we did, it was to work with Chula Vista and cities in South County to fast track 125. In prior years, we were prioritizing the infrastructure of the roads throughout the county and which ones would be built and what priority. And they asked to have this one fast tracked. That's why we financed this the way we did, or how it got started originally as a private roadway. And then because of economic times and the ability to buy this infrastructure for about 30 cents on the dollar, SANDAG chose to do that. So when we think about this and think about the year 2027, I would just ask that we need to look at things collectively, not in a silo. This isn't the only project, and what projects would be up at that time and where to best allocate money. So I appreciate what she's trying to do. I understand that we want to save that we can, but keep in mind, everything we do is financed with bonds.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think that the question, Mayor Salas, one of the things that you said was an updated cash flow. And it is true that we need to consider all things together. So can we have this be wrapped into a future item so that it can be discussed together with other things?
So let me just say thank you very much to Ms. Jones for understanding the importance of this item, and to say that I'm satisfied with the work that Mary Kay's office did in conjunction with the independent auditor that looks at the SANDAG expenditures every year. So I'm thankful for that. As far as Mr. Hall goes, yeah, I remember the onset of the discussion of the SR 125 and how it came about. And yes, it was fast track, but it really wasn't a fast track project of SANDAG. It was a fast track project of private developers that built the road and contributions from the people of Chula Vista through development impact fees to help fund the road. So in other words, the people of Chula Vista are really being taxed twice, initially in helping to fund the construction of the road, and now in utilizing. My final request. But I have to remind the board that this is the only toll road that's south of Orange County, the only one. The the I-15 fast track corridors, there's still a matter of choice for people to use that. They can either choose to get on the fast track, or they can choose to use the freeway. Here in the South Bay, this is what we have to deal with. And for a matter of, if you looked at the report and you saw where the drivers are utilizing the SR 125, it's all of the South Bay. So you're looking at a community that has a lower per capita income than most parts of other San Diego County, and yet our people have to pay to use a road. Now, what are we doing here? The road is underutilized because of the tolls. And yet people are parked on the 805. They're parked on the 5 because they're trying to do toll avoidance. That creates a lot of frustration with the public, number one, and a lot of cars idling and spewing CHG gases. I think that this is a good thing to get rid of this toll as sooner rather than later. And so again, just in case you couldn't hear my request at the onset, I'm asking the board today to consider a policy directive making the retirement of the debt a budgetary priority, and policy to direct staff to develop options to fully fund the debt and the call of bonds and revert the control of the SR 125 to 2027. That's my request of the board. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll just say that I think it's best practice for us to consider budgetary items all together with the budget. So, I mean, retiring the debt is a budgetary decision, and I think we should definitely talk about it. And I appreciate you raising it here. It seems like there are policy considerations and GHG considerations and equity considerations and financial considerations. And so we need, but the budget, I think giving direction at this point to make something else be a budget priority is a discussion we should be having as part of the budget, so that it can be looked at holistically. I do see some other hands up, so let me just call on my colleagues here, our colleagues. So Councilmember Shu.
Thank you, Chair Blix, for bringing up the other implications of addressing this financial toll road issue. And I agree with Mayor Salas with how we should be addressing equity issues and a number of other things within our entire transportation system because of this toll road. I would just like to add, if she is proposing further review of 125 and the toll road, what are its implications to our efforts to reduce vehicle miles traveled? What are some other strategies that can be employed to address the equity issues she brought up and really fund our transportation systems well? As I expressed before, I have my concerns that if we took away the toll on 125, which would be fair and good for certain communities, that I fear that it would increase pollution in La Mesa, that would have increased vehicle miles traveled in La Mesa. Now, I just threw that in there just so that we could see the big picture. I don't want to pick on Mayor Salas. I know she's trying to do the best thing for her community and try to be equitable to our communities in South Bay. And I really want to applaud her for doing that. So, but I hope we do look at the bigger picture as we move forward. And paying off the debt, sure, I agree with you, Mayor Salas. Sooner the better. and we can move forward. But I hope we do look at the bigger picture and how it affects all of us and really do what is right. So thank you, Mayor Salas, for bringing this forward. I know it's taken some time, but it's important.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Gasterland.
Thank you. I want to say a few words and thank Mayor Salas for what she said. Mayor, you are defending not only the people who live and work within your city, but your students. The University of California, San Diego and San Diego State University have many transfer students who go to community college in the various community colleges in our region. And you are absolutely right. The toll on the highway that you are highlighting is a double taxation. And our students among us, in a way, are some of the poorest in terms of income. They have a negative income. They're paying to go to school, they're paying their tuition, and they too are affected by this toll, especially when they live in your region. So I wanted to highlight that and thank you for bringing this forward. I support your request, and if it is a motion for extra consideration, I would second your motion.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mayor Minto.
Good morning. Thank you for everything. I want to bring up something that was talked about by Councilmember Koval from my council last time she was here, and it also came up in some other meetings with staff. And that is, as we go forward, we have to consider that if we remove the toll from this road, and I'm not opposed to that, as who really wants to pay on any road that we paid for once already? And but it's going to increase traffic in the northbound that will come through, like Councilmember Shu said, not only through La Mesa, but El Cajon, Santee, and then the eastern parts of the city of San Diego, which is the East Elliott area, to go to 15. And there haven't been a lot of studies to show that, but we know that we already have increased goods movements, for instance, and that would be a terrible thing to open that up and then not consider the increased volume of traffic and how we might have to adjust our lanes of traffic and freeways, the 125, the 52, and even the 15 connectors. So just like to reiterate that, as make sure it's in the front of some of our minds that, you know, one thing always leads to another. So thank you for that time.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Sankey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As a community that's been affected, I would argue negatively by the removal of a toll on the San Diego Coronado Bay Bridge, I would just be careful what you wish for on this one, following Mayor Minto's comments. I would imagine that if we were to think about doing this, we better do it deliberately with some data points and studies and some more research background on this. Mary, love you to death. Totally understand where you're coming from, and also agree that retiring debt is a great thing to do. But I would just tread carefully on this one. Again, as a community that is negatively impacted by the removal of a toll, I would say, you know, there's other sides to the coin that we probably want to consider. Thank you.
Okay, and so just to kind of wrap this up, so we don't need to have a motion in order to put something on a future agenda. So direction has been requested, and we have a whole budget process of looking at a lot of things all together. So I think that we've talked about this, and I appreciate it very much, you going on the tour and bringing it up for us and allowing us to have the dialogue. And I think it'll come back to us for a future discussion. So
we're not taking any action today, but I have a commitment that this will be placed on the agenda quickly so that we can consider this. And I agree with everyone that whatever we do should be data driven. And so, and I appreciate the concern that some people have that, you know, opening up a road to have greater access to the public and relieving something on the 805 and the 5. You know, I think that a toll across the bridge to be dumped into a city in one spot is very, very much different than a toll road that is connecting to other freeways. I think that's a totally different situation. And as far as creating GHG gases in other communities. I want to see the data on that, because that to me is just that statement. It's where's the facts to support the statement. And so I agree with you totally. We have to be data driven. And I certainly believe that removing the tolls of this will enhance the quality of life in our community for many, many people. It will address the issues of social inequity, and it will allow us to really fully maximize our potential for economic development. So I look forward to the discussion in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So now we have our second item, and this is our last item on the agenda from the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor. And this is related to the Vendor Operational and System Controls Review. So I will hand this over to our auditor, Mary Kay.
Thank you again. Just to do a quick close.
Mary, I'm so sorry. Could I interrupt real quick before you get started? Chair Blakespeare, we do need to vote to accept the report on the previous item.
Francesca, if you could hold on 1 minute, I actually have
Sure.
a couple more matters that need to be clarified on that item. I didn't want to interrupt anybody. It really needs to be clarified, a couple of things that were noted. Caltrans had never audited. It was actually a self-certification on the overhead rates. However, they did recently have an audit from FTA, and it was a clear and clean audit over the overhead. So just that clarification. And then one more other quick clarification is I really want to discourage a continued comment around, we did not perform an audit on this engagement. However, really want to discourage the comments on independent auditors performing audits and therefore, there's never issues and everything. It's very important to understand the role of an independent auditor, their limit of scope, limit of time, and materiality thresholds are very different than looking at things deeper and in more of a larger scope. And so, it's not always just because, and so that should be clarified, those two matters. So this was, Mayor Salas is correct, this wasn't an audit, and external auditors do not go into the in-depth review because they simply can't. It's a different scope. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, it's good. It's a good reminder about what was the scope of that project in the first place.
Right.
So I think we apparently need a vote to accept the report. So let's go ahead.
So I move to accept.
Second, Sotelo.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion from Mayor Mento and a second from Mayor Sotelo Solis. So let's go ahead and vote.
Thank you very much. For the city of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
All yes.
Thank you. For the city of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Salas, yes.
Thank you. For the city of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, aye.
Thank you. For the county of San Diego, Supervisor Anderson.
Aye.
Thank you. For the city of Del Mar, Councilmember Gasterland.
Gasterland, Del Mar, yes.
Thank you. For the city of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. For the city of Encinitas, Chair Blakespeare.
Yes.
Thank you. The city of Escondido is absent. For the city of Imperial Beach, Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs.
Yes.
Thank you. For the city of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
La Mesa, yes.
Thank you. For the city of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Mayor Vasquez, yes.
Thank you. For the city of National City, Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
Thank you. For the city of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yes.
Thank you. For the city of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Aye.
Thank you. For the city of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
Thank you. For the city of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
Thank you. For the city of Santee, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
Thank you. For the city of Solana Beach, Mayor Hebner.
Hebner, yes.
Thank you. And for the city of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Vista, yes.
Thank you very much. And that item does pass with 18 yeses and 1 absence.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So let's move on to item 12. If you're a member of the public wishing to speak, please put your hand up during this presentation and we'll hand it to you, Mary Kay.
Thank you. Hello again. So this review was of the vendor operational and system control process that we performed. This audit was actually a part of our annual audit plan, where our focus here was really to look at the overall system controls of around a process and the procedures to ensure that there's accurate and updated policies and that the controls are in place and that they're actually being used. And so that's really where our focus moved into. I think it's been more beneficial for SANDAG overall. This was around the vendor operational process and controls around a vendor edit table, adding a vendor, setting up a vendor, and paying a vendor. So with that, we were approved to do this under the annual audit plan. We brought it to the audit committee on October 22nd, 2021, and now we are bringing it to the board. Michael Ryan was the lead auditor, along with Lloyd, who could not be here today, to perform this audit. And so I am going to hand it over to Mike, his first presentation, and unfortunately his last, because he's leaving us. And so, Michael, are you ready to discuss?
Yeah, I'm ready to discuss. Quick point, do I share my screen or someone controlling the PowerPoint?
No, there's someone controlling the PowerPoint. So you can go ahead and just put your camera on and proceed.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning, board members. As Mary stated, we did a vendor operational and system control review this past fall. And our results is like, can I get to the next slide, please? So our scope was from July 1st, 15, all the way through June 30th this past year. And we reviewed the vendor process system controls, including review of the database. And as Mary stated, adding, deleting, and approving entries in the vendor database. Our objectives were to review SANDAG's operational process and system controls to ensure the policies are consistent with federal and state regulations, verify the controls are sufficient and consist of supporting documentations and any other relevant data, and assess SANDAG's ability to track and obtain sufficient documentation and keep adequate records of process controls that support adherence to said policies and procedures. Next slide, please. So our first finding of 3 was that SANDAG segregation of duties matrix lacks controls and is not being followed. So SANDAG staff has what they call a segregation of duties matrix. It's table 1 in the report if you have seen it. It's just a spreadsheet that maps out employees' duties as it relates to the vendor database and adding and deleting vendors. What we found was that SANDAG staff was not adhering to their own matrix. And moreover, the matrix itself as it was designed does not adequately segregate duties. So we recommended that staff should review and update its segregation of duty matrix to adhere to SANDAG's Board Policy 41, the SCO's internal control guidelines, and other best practices. And the OIPA encourages SANDAG staff seek guidance from the OIPA when designing the new segregation of duties matrix. And once a new segregation of duty matrix is completed, we recommend that SANDAG should implement controls to ensure staff adhere to that updated matrix. Next slide, please. Our second finding was that the vendor database was incomplete, inaccurate, and lacks quality controls. So the database is not adequately designed to ensure that status fields of vendors are filled and updated. We found some data fields that were empty, or there was an active and inactive field that wasn't always used. And we also found incomplete vendor information, duplicate vendors, and includes vendors that do not meet SANDAG's definition of vendors. For example, incomplete vendor information would be a vendor that was not explicitly spelled out, like there was one vendor that was listed as Center for the Applied, and that was just the name. So we made quite a few recommendations for this one. So we recommended that staff review all vendors and classify them as active or inactive and label them as such. We recommend that we replace or update the current vendor management software to prevent the creation of duplicate vendors. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. We also recommend a standardized naming convention to avoid the near duplicate vendors. The example we point out was the United States Postal Service was listed as a vendor in in the vendor database, but it was labeled as both United States Postal Service and US Postal Service. Same vendor, different name, so it goes in as a duplicate vendor. Add missing information such as taxpayer identification numbers and address for existing and active vendors. We recommended that they reconcile the vendor list to ensure that incomplete, inaccurate, or duplicate vendors are removed from the vendor list. We also recommended that staff consider hiring additional staff to ensure the ease of staff's multiple job duties. We recommend they ensure that only entities conforming to SANDAG's definition of a vendor are included in the vendor list. And lastly, to provide training to staff for managing the database to ensure consistency in entering the vendor information to avoid any of the problems we stated above. Next slide. And our last finding was we found that the accounts payable summations do not have enough room to fully display totals of 1 billion or more. So the accounts payable summations did not have enough space for a billionth place digit, if that makes sense. For example, for fiscal year 15-16, the total was approximately 1.185 billion, but the total shown on the general ledger accounts payable summary documents is approximately 185 million, so that billionth digit is missing. There's a risk if summations are not carefully reviewed, staff could underreport the total accounts payable summary summations by at least 1 billion. To be clear, we're not saying this happened, we're just pointing out because of the limitations of the software, this is a risk. And we recommended that the OIPA, that SANDAG either update or replace the current accounting software so the totals can be fully displayed in the vendor's accounts payable ledger. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. And lastly, management has agreed and prepared a corrective action plan for all the findings and is working with us in addressing these findings. And I'll leave it to the board for any questions.
Okay, well, that was interesting. Thank you for the report on that. Mayor Jones has her hand up, and then we'll go to the public comments.
Thank you so much. Okay, I have a lot of questions and I'm going to try to get through my pages. Just a couple of comments to start with. The fact that in finding number 1 that we have no checks and balances being followed is concerning to me. Number 2, the fact that we have, and I don't really understand how this could happen, that we have a vendor that just has like a G and an asterisk. What does that even, I mean, like, how do we even know who that is that's getting paid? And then also having the duplicate vending numbers really is, I don't understand that either. And then, you know, that we've got these different taxpayer, well, I don't know, the taxpayer identification numbers and a listed as, there's no control of that. And I don't know if you guys want to go one by one on this, but also the management increases, inconsistent vendor management increases the risk of duplicate payments. And then on finding number 3, the fact that we have $1 billion, like not even on there, that's kind of interesting. So I guess at the end of the day, what I really want to know from staff, SANDAG staff, is, okay, we've agreed to these findings, and when are we planning on actually having the fix? Because I think time is of the essence, and I think, you know, trying to figure out how to bring confidence to our agency is extremely important when we're moving forward with a lot of projects. So how can, could you maybe, Andre, I see you're up on the screen, maybe you could answer that question, when are we going to have a fix? And you know, how that will work, or maybe it's Colleen and sorry, Ray.
You know, Mayor Jones, maybe I can start off being the CFO, and then if Ray and Colleen have any comments on it, I'm glad, sure they can add on to it. But in general, first of all, you know, the comment that Mary Kay made earlier, you know, we do have audited financial statements from all of our programs, be it the commission, the Source Point, SR 125, SANDAG, etc. But certainly the level of detail that they go into is not as the level of detail that Mary Kay and her staff go into. So we certainly appreciate what Mary Kay and her staff are doing, because certainly there's things that we can always improve in our policies and procedures and our controls. And so, again, we appreciate what Mary Kay is doing. I guess I'll just, if I can, just separate the two comments that we generally have. One is on the segregation of duties. I think back a couple of years ago when we had the hiring freeze, we had a couple of accountants that we had just left, and unfortunately we couldn't fill the position. So there were certain duties that other staff had to do that generally wouldn't have done it. I'm pleased to say that we are fully staffed as of October of last year. We've taken a closer look at the segregation of duties, and we actually monitor now that on a quarterly basis. And so we make sure that staff is doing appropriate functions and not overstepping and doing other functions. So I think that area is fairly well documented, and we're comfortable with it going forward. The second real area is, once we had the consolidation back in the early 2000s, we took on MTS's software, the ERP solution, which is one solution. And I'm pleased to say that just late last year, we are moving on to a new ERP system called Tyler Technologies. We do know that there were shortcomings in our software. We did realize that every time we had to do a fix, it cost us money. And so we do realize that there were some weaknesses in the software that we had, but that's going to be a thing of the past as we move to the new ERP system. Now, you did mention there's a number of items that Mary Kay brought to our attention. We looked at all of those and we agree with what she found. But that being said, we were fairly comfortable that there were no inadvertent payments made because of any of the issues that were outstanding. We took a look at all of them. So again, there were shortcomings, and early this fiscal year, calendar year, we're moving over to new Tyler Technology software. So a lot of the issues that are brought to management's attention should be a thing of the past.
Okay, so a lot, does that mean all of the issues or a lot of the issues? Like what won't be addressed? Is there anything that won't be addressed?
No, I should clarify myself. Everything that was in the report that Mary Kay will be addressed.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. And then, so that'll be done by the summer, I'm assuming?
So the implementation is going to be starting fairly soon, and it will probably be about a year process to be fully implemented. But certainly the accounts payable, payroll, those are one of the first modules that we'll be converting. And so we'll be monitoring those very closely.
Okay. Could we get a report? Oh, sorry.
Oh, Mayor Jones, may I respond to that, if I may? Hassan has tasked me in this coming fiscal year to look at both the policies and the procedures that we have in contracts, and also to work very closely with the IT department in the implementation of the ERP system that Andre is speaking about. And so that process is going to be going through 2022. And the first thing that we're going to be looking at here is really the audit, how we could put in more controls and procedures. And we're going to be implementing those internally as we move to the new ERP system. So we've recognized that there needs to be something done, and I've been tasked with doing that. So I can bring back a report to you once we've finished that. So.
Thank you, Ray. And so I assume you'll be working with Mary Kay's office to make sure that they're also satisfied.
Absolutely. We're going to work closely with Mary Kay's office.
Great. And then now I have some questions for, I'm not sure if it's going to be Mary Kay or not, or if it would be Michael. I'm not entirely sure. So, so obviously there were some erroneous vendors that have been set up. So is there anything that would stop the repeat, the discussion, so that we know for sure that there have been no double payments actually made? How do we know this? Do we know this?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jones. I can respond to that. So this is a good question, and you do look at some of the vendors and you think, wow, did they actually pay on those? And if they did, who did they go to? And really this audit was specifically designed to just look at the controls and the policies to make sure they were working and the policies were good. And so in that, we of course came up with these findings. We are getting ready to start a contract and procurement audit. And the reason why we didn't actually test those vendors to see if payments had actually been made or double made was because that's what we will then do. And we didn't want to duplicate our work, especially with our resource limitations. So in that contract and procurement audit, we will actually pull some of those vendors that were identified in this report and trace them to see were they actually paid on, and if they were they legitimate and everything. So that will get looked at. Of course, you can't look at 100% of the population, which of course SANDAG, that's a lot, billions every year. But we can certainly take a large enough scope, which is again, how we discuss, we do take a deeper dive and a much bigger scope when we're looking, which is what we should do internally. We will take a big chunk of this and look at those vendors to make sure these, as well as other ones, were appropriately paid and they were legitimate vendors.
Okay, so, okay, well, thanks for that. So are we digging into enough to make sure that we're really making sure that this is all being done? Because I can tell you, no offense, but I know I get a lot of people saying, government is not efficient with our tax dollars. How can we figure out how to show people that yes, we are being diligent with our taxpayer dollars? I don't even know what you're working on. And I'm sorry to say that, but I would personally, as a board member, like to know exactly what you're working on at any given time, and have like a time frame of when what audits are ongoing and happening right now, and what the time frame is, because I can tell you certainly, and I'm sure I'm not the only board member, but I'm quite confused. And again, no offense, but I want to make sure that we're actually following the provisions of AB 805 and making sure that you're actually working on things that are meaningful to the board members.
No, absolutely. That's a very fair question. So just to give you a little background, and hopefully there's some understanding here, is we're a very small staff. In fact, I'm losing another one simply because, one, we are much lower starting pay than even the city's beginning auditors. Two, I'm having my auditors work, at 120% of their time and efforts, including myself doing audits. Where most auditors have so much staff in their capacity that they're only required to put in like that 80%, which is a typical, resource drive. And so I've got my auditors pretty much exhausted, and we are doing audits, and we're doing them in such detail because they had never been done in such detail, which is, why you are seeing the findings you are seeing. But a typical audit, even with more staff than we have, and I'll remind that we were given 7 positions additional and we only got 1 more. So we have literally 3 auditors and myself to do all this and to cover a lot of scope and in depth enough for it to be meaningful. And so a typical audit, just an average audit, is going to take anywhere from 3 to 6 to 8 months. And it's because we can't just write a report and say it's good to go. We have to, do our testing. We have to do our understanding. We have to pull our regulations and laws, just like an external auditor does, but we do it in much more depth, right? To ensure that we're covering our bases here. And so we can't just write a report and say it's good to go. We really have to back that report up fully with testing and control reviews and all of that. And we're doing this, and typically we're doing it as fast as we can do it. Like I said, many of my auditors will tell you, I expect 120-degree pace versus 80. And it's because we are so smally staffed. But just so you know, we do have an annual audit plan that we get approved by the audit committee every year. It does lay out the hours that I've dedicated to those projects. It does come to the board, and then we start working on those projects. And there are deviations. Right now I have an emergency situation where I have one of my auditors out of the country for an undetermined amount of time. So stuff like that comes up, and when you're a very small staff, things happen, but we are producing at a pretty fast-paced rate for as small as we are, and the findings that we come up with are pretty significant in helping improve SANDAG and bring about a better control and helping them be successful. So to answer your question, we're following the audit plan. Some of our audits, you know, the last two, these two that you're seeing today, we brought to the audit committee in October, and our hope is to get them to the board the very next month, but that doesn't happen often. And here we are, you know, 4 months later, but we are really diligently trying to move things forward and hopefully by the next month get things to the board so you see the work, because I totally get it looks like where's all the work coming from, but we are working, and we are working hard and diligently, and it's just a matter of getting it to the board.
Let me just bust in here. So, Mayor, we really appreciate your hard work, and we know that it's a difficult employment environment, and we recognize the difficulties, and thank you for all you're doing. So I think also, you know, staff has said that they are fully responsive to this audit report, and they are working to change as quickly as possible all these systems over. I would like to be able to move to the public comment if we're able to do that now. Mayor Jones, so we could hear from the public too on this item.
So I just had one other comment, and that is that, you know, I've asked for audits on bike lanes to make sure that we are not being taken advantage of. And at our last meeting, I actually asked for the Barrio Logan, being that we were spending over $8 million per mile on that. I think we owe it to the public. I think I would like to see an updated version of where we're at as far as what projects we're going to be seeing, because I don't recall actually seeing like a matrix. This is what we're working on. This is where we're going to deliver it. I think that is something that I personally would like to see, and I'm sure the whole board would as well. So if we could figure out how to make that happen, I would say that would be vital for our organization, because again, you know, we're talking about establishing trust and confidence.
Yes, okay, good. Well, let's get an updated report of the work plan from the auditor. And let's go ahead and go to the public comment. Do we have any, Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public.
Okay. All right. Are there any other board members who wanted to make comments on this? So I'm not seeing any others. So thank you so much, Mary Kay, for the report, and staff for the response. So we need to have a motion to receive, accept the report. So I would entertain one.
So move, Sotelo Solis.
I'll second.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go ahead and vote.
Thank you, Chair. For the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Salas, aye.
Thank you. For the City of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, aye.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Anderson.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Del Mar, Councilmember Gasterland.
Del Mar, yes.
Thank you. For the City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Encinitas, Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
Thank you. The City of Escondido is absent. For the City of Imperial Beach, Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs.
Spriggs, yes.
Thank you. For the City of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
La Mesa, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Mayor Vasquez, yes.
Thank you. For the City of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
Thank you. For the City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez. I'll come back for the City of Oceanside. For the City of Poway, Mayor Voss. For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria. For the City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Santee, Mayor, oh, I apologize. Mayor Minto had to leave, so the City of Santee is absent. For the City of Solana Beach, Mayor Hebner.
Hebner, yes.
Thank you. For the City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to come back to a couple. For the City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez. I don't see him on the line. The city of Oceanside is absent and the city of Poway is absent as well. So that item, just give the voting slide a moment. Apologies, I'm just giving the production team a moment with the voting record.
Okay, so I saw that it passed.
Thank you.
So let's move to, thank you. So let's move back to member comments. So that's our board member comments. I know Mayor Gasterlin had her hand up before. So yes, we'll call on you first. Go ahead.
Terrific, thank you. I wanted to update this board on the vote that the North County Transit District Board took on January 20th, so that we are all on the same page and all understand where things are and what will continue to be talked about between now and February 28th. On January 20th, the NCTD, the North County Transit District Board, approved a job order contract for $1.6 million to their on-call contractor Exxon to install a short stretch of fence at the Coast Boulevard crossing in Del Mar and about a 30-foot wide stretch of fence at 13th Street in Del Mar. Included in this was approval by the board to install a 6-foot tall wire mesh welded fence, also called a hog wire fence, through the middle of the trail that's behind me on the upper bluff, 40 feet above the tracks and 200 feet to the east of the tracks. The NCTD board created the opportunity to continue to negotiate between the City of Del Mar, the Coastal Commission, and NCTD through February 28th, specifically about Del Mar licensing the continued public use of this trail. So what does that mean? Del Mar is fully willing and has been and will continue to be. There's a dog. Maybe it's this dog. The liability for trip and fall through this license agreement for public use. No construction is needed for this existing trail. And at the risk of showing you, what really is here, I'm going to show another view. So this is the trail above the bluff. This is the very highest density area of Del Mar behind me. And we contend that this is akin to trails in Torrey Pines State Park. So we're really hoping that we're going to be able to look to trails in Torrey Pines State Park, the Scripps Preserve, and Seagrove Park, and think about what it takes for demarcation fencing as needed. Some 42-inch fall protection fencing here and there is needed in order to make sure that this beautiful trail that's accessible right from street end at 4th Street in Del Mar is preserved for public use for our region. That is Del Mar's goal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Sankey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to specifically thank those of you who reached out to me following the publication of my op-ed in the UT last week related to the suicide barrier, and implore all of us on this board who are significantly more influential or have more jurisdictional authority in different areas of San Diego than just Coronado to realize this is a regional important issue, and appreciate your help moving forward as Caltrans, who's working very, very diligently on this, finishes off the environmental work this summer, and we move forward with design and construction. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Sankey. We have our Caltrans District 11, Ann Fox. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. And I'm in today for our district director, Delarda, and I'll just add to Councilmember Sankey's comment on the suicide deterrent project. As you know, we have been working on this project to build the suicide deterrent on the Coronado Bridge. And we've actually reached a milestone in advancing that project. So this coming up Monday, January 31st, we'll begin circulating the draft environmental document for public comment. This is going to be a 30-day public comment period. So this will run from January 31st through March 1st of this year. This is really important. This is the time that we need to hear from you and the community on this project. We'll be accepting comments through mail, through email, in our online forum. For additional information, just please visit our Caltrans webpage on that. We'll also be holding a virtual public meeting on Thursday, February 10th from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll soon be sharing that that meeting information again, sharing that information on our webpage and by social media. So please look for that and express your comments on the project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anne, for bringing that up. Councilmember Edson. She's our new NCTD rep, which we're happy to have you here for that. Congratulations on being the new chair.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be back here on the SANDAG board again. So as we've heard today and for many months, proposed fencing along the NCTD owned right-of-way through Del Mar has been widely and passionately discussed topic. As Councilmember Gasterlin mentioned, on January 20th, the Board of NCTD authorized our executive director to proceed with a modified fencing plan for the Del Mar Bluffs. The modified plan was the product of a 14-month working group effort between NCTD, the City of Del Mar, and the California Coastal Commission. In the spirit of good faith negotiation and collaboration, the working group produced suggested modifications to NCTD's initial fencing plan. This modified fencing plan allows continued public access to the upper bluff trails and mediates public and private view obstruction to the maximum extent possible while fostering improved public safety along that segment of the rail corridor. As Councilmember Gasterlin also mentioned, sensitive to concerns raised by Del Mar, and in an effort to provide a bit more time for Del Mar to consider its options, the board did not move staff's recommendation. Instead, the board moved to approve the working plan's modified fencing plan, contingent upon the City of Del Mar entering into a licensing agreement similar to the agreements 7 other North County cities, including my own, have entered into for the use of NCTD's right-of-way. If the City of Del Mar chooses not to enter the licensing agreement by February 28th, the action by the board authorized the executive director to proceed with installing fencing consistent with NCTD's established standards and staff's recommendation. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Edson, for that perspective and additional context. Let's see, I saw another hand pop up, but now it's gone down again. Oh, yes, Francesca.
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt. I just, on the last vote, I noticed, I didn't hear a response from the City of San Diego, but I do notice that both of the representatives are still here with us. So if you don't mind, if I could ask them to state their vote for the record, either Mayor Gloria or Councilmember Elo Rivera.
Council President, I said aye. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I didn't hear.
My apologies. I think I just didn't hear you. Thank you very much, and sorry for the interruption.
No, it's okay. Glad we clarified that. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your comments and to the staff for the presentations. So our next board meeting is virtual and it's Friday, February 11th at 9 a.m. And if you're a North County representative coastal, let's go directly into the next meeting where we're making our appointments and not wait till 12:30 for that. So if you can log into that link, that would be great. So with that, our meeting is adjourned.